The most dangerous sound in the ocean is not the scream of a torpedo or the crushing groan of a collapsing hull, but the familiar rhythm of something that sounds completely safe. In the silent war beneath the Atlantic, survival depends on the ability to distinguish between the noise of the living world and the mechanical signature of an enemy. On a gray afternoon in late 1974, a Soviet sonar operator sitting in a darkened room 400 feet beneath the surface hears a sound that he has heard 1,000 times before. He classifies it, logs it, and dismisses it as the most mundane thing in the sea, unaware that he has just made the first mistake in a sequence that will nearly trigger the Third World War. To understand how a single acoustic error could threaten the geopolitical balance of the globe, one must first understand the peculiar atmosphere of 1974. The Cold War had entered a phase that historians often describe as dangerous stability. The terrifying peaks of the Cuban Missile Crisis were a decade in the past, and the crumbling of the Berlin Wall was still a distant future. The world had settled into a grim equilibrium known as détente. On the surface, diplomats shook hands in Geneva and Helsinki, signing treaties and drinking champagne. But beneath the surface of the world's oceans, there was no détente. There was only a relentless, high-stakes game of cat and mouse that never paused for breath. For the crew of the Soviet nuclear submarine patrolling the edge of the GIUK Gap, the strategic choke point between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, the politics of Washington and Moscow are abstract concepts. Their reality is defined by the recycled air of the ventilation system, the smell of hydraulic fluid, and the endless, crushing pressure of the North Atlantic. Their mission is not to attack, but to watch. They are the sentries of the Soviet Union, tasked with monitoring the flow of NATO traffic moving from the open ocean toward the European coast. The daily routine on a long-range patrol is a masterpiece of monotony. The submarine operates in a state of suspended animation, moving slowly to conserve reactor fuel and minimize noise. The crew lives in an environment where the sun never rises and the temperature never changes. Days bleed into nights, marked only by the change of the watch schedules and the rotation of meals. In this sensory deprivation tank, the only connection to the reality outside the hull comes through the headphones of the sonar operators. These men are the eyes of the ship. They sit in the acoustic shack, a small, dimly lit compartment filled with the hum of cooling fans and the green glow of cathode ray tube displays. Their job is to sift through the acoustic trash of the ocean. They listen to the clicks of sperm whales, the tectonic grinding of the seabed, and the distant thrum of merchant ships traveling the commercial lanes. They are looking for the specific, rhythmic signature of American nuclear propulsion, but mostly they find only noise. On this particular day, the ocean is cluttered. The hydrophones pick up the chaotic background static of the Atlantic, the sound of waves crashing on the surface miles above, the biological noise of marine life, and the distant interference of storms. Amidst this confusion, a new signal appears on the waterfall display. It is faint at first, a ghostly line of green pixels drifting down the screen, but it slowly resolves into a distinct contact. The operator isolates the frequency. He adjusts the gain on his console, filtering out the background hiss to focus on the newcomer. He assigns it a designation, Sierra 7. In the lexicon of naval warfare, Sierra designates a sonar contact. It is a neutral term, a label for an unknown object that is making noise in the water. Sierra 7 is moving slowly, plodding along at a speed of perhaps 8 or 9 knots. It is not trying to hide. It is churning the water with a heavy, rhythmic beat that resonates clearly through the hydrophones. The operator listens to the raw audio. He hears the heavy thrum, thrum, thrum of a propeller biting into the water. He counts the blade rate. He analyzes the harmonics of the engine vibration. To his trained ear, the sound is unmistakable. It is the sound of a diesel engine, specifically a low-speed, high-torque engine laboring against the drag of the sea. It sounds unrefined, mechanical, and entirely civilian. He checks his reference charts. The acoustic profile does not match a warship. Warships are designed for speed or stealth. This vessel is neither fast nor quiet. It sounds like a heavy displacement hull dragging a net. It sounds like a fishing trawler. The classification is almost automatic. The North Atlantic is teeming with fishing fleets from Norway, Iceland, and the British Isles. These trawlers are the acoustic litter of the ocean, the floating debris that sonar operators are trained to ignore so they can focus on the real threats. A trawler is not a target, it is an obstacle, a source of noise pollution that makes the job of hunting submarines more difficult. The operator reports the contact to the con. Sierra 7, classified as merchant vessel, likely fishing trawler, range 8,000 yards, bearing steady. The captain of the Soviet submarine receives the report with the indifference of a man who has heard the same thing 100 times. A fishing boat is of no strategic interest. It is simply another piece of data to be logged in the patrol diary. The submarine continues on its course, maintaining its depth and its silence. The crew in the control room goes back to their coffee and their checklists. But inside the machinery of the decision-making process, a fatal error has already occurred. The error is not one of incompetence, but of assumption. The Soviet doctrine relies on the belief that the physical world is honest. A diesel engine sounds like a diesel engine because of the physics of combustion and mechanical linkage. A propeller sounds like a propeller because of the way metal strikes water. They assume that acoustic signatures are immutable fingerprints, that a thing sounds like what it is. This reliance on acoustic truth blinds them to the possibility of a manufactured lie. They do not consider that the sound entering their hydrophones might be a carefully constructed performance. The operator has classified Sierra 7 based on what he hears, not on what is actually there. He hears a trawler because the sound waves hitting his sensors have been engineered to match his expectations of a trawler. The seeds of this disaster are sown in the very ordinariness of the contact. If the signal had been strange or unidentifiable, the captain might have been suspicious. If it had been silent, he would have gone to battle stations. But because it sounds exactly like a harmless fishing boat, it bypasses the skepticism of the command crew. It is too ordinary to question. It is a piece of the background scenery, as innocuous as a cloud in the sky. However, Sierra 7 is not a fishing trawler, it is not dragging nets, and it is not hunting for cod. It is a vessel of immense power and complexity, operating under a set of rules that the Soviet crew has not yet begun to fathom. As the minutes tick by, the Soviet submarine finds itself on a converging course with the contact. The captain decides to use the opportunity for a training exercise. Shadowing a civilian ship is a standard drill for submarine crews. It allows the sonar team to practice tracking a moving target, refining their range estimates and motion analysis without the risk of alerting a NATO warship. It is a low-risk maneuver, a way to break the boredom of the patrol and keep the crew sharp. The order is given to alter course. The Soviet submarine turns, falling in behind Sierra 7. They match speed, settling into the acoustic shadow of the trawler. The sonar operator continues to monitor the rhythmic thumping of the target's propeller. It is a comforting, steady sound, the heartbeat of a vessel going about its mundane business on the high seas. The Soviet captain believes he is the hunter. He believes he is stalking a clueless civilian ship, using its noise to mask his own presence while his crew practices their firing solutions. He feels a sense of professional superiority. He is an unseen predator trailing a grazing animal. He does not realize that the animal is not grazing. He does not realize that the heavy, rhythmic thrumming is not the sound of a diesel engine struggling with a net, but the sound of a nuclear turbine being manipulated with surgical precision. He is not the hunter. He is the guest who has just walked through the front door of a trap that was set before he even left port. The ocean around them remains dark and cold. The pressure on the hull is constant. To the north, the ice packs of the Arctic are shifting. To the south, the shipping lanes of Europe are buzzing with commerce. And here, in the gray water between them, two nuclear-powered vessels are moving in tandem, connected by a beam of sound that is built entirely on deception. This is the nature of the routine that wasn't. It begins with the comfort of the familiar. It feeds on the arrogance of expertise. The sonar operator is a specialist, a man trained to trust his ears above all else. He has classified the contact correctly based on the data he has. The problem is not his hearing. The problem is that the data itself is a weapon. As the Soviet submarine settles into the wake of Sierra 7, the distance between them closes. The water separating the two hulls is filled with the churn of the trawler's wake. The Soviet crew relaxes. They are safe. They are hidden. They are simply following a fishing boat through the emptiness of the Atlantic. But 1974 is not a year for simple things. The technology of the Cold War has evolved beyond the brute force of missiles and armor. It has entered the realm of the psychological and the sensory. The battle is no longer just about who has the bigger gun, it is about who can control the reality perceived by the enemy. Sierra 7 plods along, maintaining its steady, chugging rhythm. It does not speed up. It does not alter course to evade. It behaves exactly as a fishing boat should behave. It is a perfect performance. And because it is perfect, the Soviet captain follows it deeper into the trap. The stage is set. The actors are in place. The audience, the listening posts of NATO and the Soviet Union, are watching the curtain rise, though only one side knows the script. The routine patrol is about to end, and the illusion of the fishing trawler is about to lead the Soviet Navy into a nightmare from which there will be no easy awakening. 400 yards ahead of the Soviet hunter, the object designated Sierra 7 continues its slow, rhythmic churn through the water. To the sonar operator in the Soviet submarine, the acoustic picture remains perfectly consistent. He hears the cavitation of a rough propeller, the sloppy mechanical clanking of a diesel engine, and the displacement of a heavy displacement hull vessel. It sounds exactly like a fishing trawler heading home with a full hold. But sound is a liar. The vessel generating that noise is not a rusted steel boat filled with nets and cod. It is the USS James Madison, SSBN 627, a Lafayette-class ballistic missile submarine carrying 16 Polaris A3 nuclear missiles. It is a machine designed to end civilizations currently engaged in one of the most sophisticated acts of camouflage in the history of naval warfare. The Soviet crew believes they are tracking a civilian target. In reality, they are listening to a symphony of deception orchestrated by American engineers. To understand how a nuclear submarine, which typically produces a high-frequency turbine whine, can mimic a diesel trawler, one must delve into the dark arts of signature management. In the 1970s, the U.S. Navy realized that silence was not always the best camouflage. In the crowded waters of the North Atlantic, silence is suspicious. A hole in the background noise draws attention. Sometimes the best way to hide is to make noise, provided it is the wrong kind of noise. The USS James Madison is equipped with auxiliary propulsion units and specialized sound dampening mounts. But in this specific operational mode, the crew is doing something counterintuitive. They are not trying to minimize their signature, they are manipulating it. By adjusting the rotation rate of the screw and engaging specific auxiliary machinery, perhaps running a diesel generator for battery charging simulation or engaging a noisemaker known as a towed acoustic decoy, they can project a false identity. The physics of this deception are incredibly complex. A nuclear submarine is a smooth, hydrodynamic teardrop. A trawler is a boxy, noisy brick. To make the former sound like the latter requires a deep understanding of how sound waves propagate through water. The Americans are broadcasting a low-frequency thump that mimics the blade rate of a civilian screw. They are hiding the distinct, telltale harmonics of the nuclear plant behind a wall of synthetic mechanical noise. This is the acoustic masquerade. It is a performance played out for an audience of one, the Soviet sonar operator trailing behind them, and the performance is flawless. On the Soviet submarine, the captain is pleased. He orders his helmsman to maintain station keeping. He decides to use Sierra 7 as a blind. This is a standard, doctrinally approved tactic in the Soviet Navy. By positioning his submarine directly in the acoustic shadow of a noisy civilian vessel, he can mask his own sound from the NATO listening networks. The noise of the trawler acts as a shield, blinding the SOSUS arrays on the ocean floor. The Soviet captain believes he is being clever. He thinks he is using a hapless fisherman to smuggle his submarine through a dangerous sector of the ocean. He has fallen into the trap of procedural blindness. He is so focused on executing the tactic of hiding behind the noise that he fails to question the nature of the noise itself. He assumes that because the contact sounds like a trawler, it is a trawler. He does not ask why a fishing boat would be maintaining such a precise, steady course with zero deviation for drift or wind. He does not ask why a civilian captain would navigate with the razor-sharp precision of a military gyroscope. As the afternoon wears on, the two vessels move in tandem, a nuclear predator stalking a nuclear prey, though the roles are reversed in the mind of the Soviet commander. The chase moves steadily eastward. They are leaving the deep, open waters of the Atlantic and approaching the continental shelf of the British Isles. The geography of the ocean floor begins to change. The abyssal plain rises up, transitioning into the rocky slopes of the European shelf. The water gets shallower, the acoustic environment becomes more chaotic as sound bounces off the rising seabed. The navigator on the Soviet submarine begins to feel a prickle of unease. He checks his charts. They are approaching the 12-mile limit, the invisible line in the water that marks the transition from international territory to the sovereign waters of the United Kingdom. "Captain," the navigator reports, "target course is taking us across the territorial boundary. Depth is decreasing." This is a critical moment of decision. In the unwritten rules of the Cold War, entering the territorial waters of a NATO nation is a major escalation. It is no longer a patrol, it is an incursion. If they are detected inside the 12-mile limit, they can be legally attacked. It is an act of aggression, a violation of sovereignty. But the captain dismisses the concern. He operates under the doctrine of plausible deniability. If they are submerged, they are invisible. If they are invisible, the line on the map does not matter. Furthermore, he reasons that the fishing trawler, Sierra 7, is likely heading for a port to offload its catch. If he stays in its acoustic shadow, he can use it to penetrate deep into British waters, gather intelligence on coastal defenses, and then slip away before anyone notices. It is a bold opportunity, a chance to win a medal. He orders the helmsman to maintain the follow. "Stay in the baffle," he commands. "Do not lose the contact." The Soviet submarine crosses the line. There is no alarm, no flash of light. They simply glide from the high seas into the jurisdiction of the Royal Navy. They are now trespassers in one of the most heavily defended maritime zones on Earth. Ahead of them, the USS James Madison continues its charade. The American crew knows exactly who is behind them. The U.S. Navy's own sonar has tracked the Soviet trailer for hours. In a standard scenario, the Americans might have tried to shake the tail, accelerating, turning hard, or dropping a noisemaker to confuse the enemy. But today, they do nothing. Why? Because the USS James Madison is not on patrol. She is going home. And her home is the Holy Loch. The American captain is under orders to return to base. He is following a strict, pre-cleared corridor through the minefields and defensive nets that protect the British coast. He is maintaining the trawler signature not to fool the Soviets, but to comply with the standard transit procedures that prevent him from being accidentally attacked by friendly forces. The fact that a Soviet submarine has decided to follow him is a complication, but it is also a supreme irony. The Russian is following the American right into the lion's den. As they cross the boundary, the water depth drops to 600 feet, then 400. The room for maneuver is shrinking. The ocean is no longer a vast three-dimensional void. It is a corridor with a floor and a ceiling. The Soviet captain is now committed. To turn back would require a high-speed maneuver that would reveal his position. To surface would be a surrender. His only option is to stick to the trawler like a limpet. He assumes the fishing boat will eventually turn into a small coastal harbor or stop to fish. He plans to break contact then and slip back out to sea. But Sierra 7 does not stop. It does not turn into a fishing village. It keeps moving, threading its way through the navigation buoys, heading deeper into the Firth of Clyde. The acoustic picture begins to change. The background noise increases. The hydrophones pick up the sound of coastal traffic, ferries, tugs, the distant hum of industry on the shore. The water becomes murky with silt and freshwater runoff from the Scottish rivers. The sonar performance degrades. The Soviet operator struggles to keep the lock on Sierra 7. "Contact is masking," he reports. "Background clutter is high." The captain orders the submarine to close the distance. Close to 1,000 yards. They creep forward, narrowing the gap. They are now so close that if the trawler were to stop suddenly, they would collide. It is a dangerous, aggressive game of bumper cars played with nuclear reactors. The Soviet crew is now operating in a state of high tension. They know they are somewhere they shouldn't be. The chart shows they are surrounded by land on three sides. They are in the throat of the Clyde estuary. This is not open ocean. This is the front porch of the United Kingdom. Yet, the captain holds his nerve. He is convinced that his acoustic camouflage is holding. He believes the British and Americans are oblivious to his presence because he is hiding behind the civilian noise. He does not realize that the civilian noise is a digital lie generated by the very enemy he thinks he is fooling. The deception is perfect because it exploits the Soviet captain's confirmation bias. He sees what he wants to see, a safe path. He hears what he wants to hear, a harmless boat. He is driving his ship and his crew into a strategic bottleneck based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the technology arrayed against him. The James Madison begins to slow. The rhythm of the diesel engine changes pitch. The American submarine is preparing to navigate the final, treacherous approach to its sanctuary. The channel here is narrow, dredged specifically for submarines. The Soviet submarine slows to match. The dance continues. They pass the Isle of Arran. They move into the deeper, shadowed waters of the fjord-like inlet. The walls of the loch rise up on either side, steep and rocky, reflecting the sound waves back into the water, creating a confusing hall of mirrors for the sonar. The Soviet captain checks his position. He is deep inside enemy territory. He has achieved a penetration that would make him a legend in the Northern Fleet, if he gets out. He decides he will follow the trawler for another few miles, record the coastal radar frequencies, and then execute a silent turn and escape. He does not know that he has already passed the point of no return. The net has been cast and he has swum into the center of it. The trawler is leading him not to a fishing ground, but to one of the most sensitive and heavily guarded square miles on the planet. As the light from the surface fades into the evening, the two submarines move silently toward the anchorage. The acoustic masquerade has worked too well. It has convinced the Soviet captain that he is safe right up until the moment when safety becomes impossible. The routine patrol has become an infiltration, and the infiltration is about to become a trap. The stage is set for the reveal. The ghost in the static is about to take off its mask. The geography of the Cold War was defined by lines on a map: the Iron Curtain, the Berlin Wall, the 38th parallel. But the most dangerous line on Earth in 1974 was not a wall or a fence. It was the mouth of a narrow, dark inlet on the west coast of Scotland known as the Holy Loch. To the casual observer standing on the rainy hills of Argyll, the loch appeared to be nothing more than a scenic fjord, a place of gray water and green slopes where pleasure boats bobbed in the mist. But beneath the surface, the Holy Loch was not a landscape, it was a vault. It served as the forward operating base for Submarine Squadron 14 of the United States Navy. At the center of the loch, anchored permanently to the seabed, lay the massive submarine tender USS Canopus. Around her, clustering like piglets nursing from a sow, were the floating dry docks and the black hulls of the fleet ballistic missile submarines. This was the Site 1 of the American nuclear deterrent in Europe. At any given moment, the Holy Loch contained enough nuclear firepower to incinerate every major city in the Soviet Union west of the Urals. It was the highest concentration of megatonnage on the planet outside of the United States itself. And on this particular evening, a Soviet attack submarine is gliding silently toward the center of it, following a ghost. The Soviet captain is still operating under the delusion of the chase. He believes he is tailing a civilian trawler into a commercial harbor. He expects to see a fish processing plant, a pier, perhaps a few rusty fishing boats. He imagines he will record the radar frequencies of the coastal defense stations, turn around in the harbor basin, and slip back out to sea. His logbook filled with valuable intelligence. He does not realize that the water around him is becoming shallower and deadlier by the minute. The Holy Loch is a geographic cul-de-sac. It is roughly 2 miles long and a mile wide. The entrance is guarded by acoustic sensors on the seabed, magnetic anomaly detectors, and shore-based patrols. It is a fortress designed to keep Soviet submarines out. Yet, by riding in the acoustic shadow of the USS James Madison, the vessel he still calls Sierra 7, the Soviet captain has bypassed the outer perimeter. He has walked through the front gate because the gate was held open for the American boat. Inside the loch, the acoustic environment is a nightmare of reverberation. The sound waves bounce off the rocky walls of the fjord, creating a chaotic echo chamber. The Soviet sonar operator is struggling to maintain contact. The rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the trawler is the only constant in a sea of noise. It is his lifeline, his guide through the darkness. Then the sound stops. The silence is sudden and shocking. Ahead of them, the USS James Madison has reached her destination. She has maneuvered alongside the USS Canopus. Her crew has thrown the lines. The reactor plant has been shifted to a low-power mode. The signature management protocols, the artificial noises generated to mimic a diesel engine, are deactivated. The submarine connects to shore power. The propeller stops turning. In an instant, the fishing trawler ceases to exist. The acoustic mask drops. Sierra 7 vanishes from the waterfall display as if it has been erased by a magnet. In the sonar shack of the Soviet submarine, the operator stares at his screen. The green line that marked the target is gone. He adjusts the gain. He sweeps the frequency bands. There is nothing but the background hiss of the Loch and the distant hum of the tender's generators. "Contact lost," he reports, his voice tight with confusion. "Sierra 7 has shut down." The captain in the control room is baffled. A trawler does not simply vanish. Even when docking, a diesel engine idles. It clatters. Chains rattle. There should be the noise of commerce. Instead, there is a heavy, industrial silence. He orders the submarine to slow to a crawl. "All stop, hover." The Soviet submarine hangs in the water, neutrally buoyant, drifting slightly with the tidal current. The depth is shallow, barely 150 feet. The keel is dangerously close to the mud. The sail is dangerously close to the surface. The captain needs to know where he is. He needs a visual fix. He orders the submarine to come to periscope depth. It is a risky maneuver in such confined waters, but he assumes he is in a fishing port. He expects to see a town, lights, perhaps a pier. The ballast tanks are trimmed. The submarine rises inches at a time. The captain grips the handles of the attack periscope. "Up scope!" The hydraulic cylinder hisses. The tube slides up through the seals. The captain presses his eye to the rubber cup. He cycles the optic to night vision mode. What he sees does not make sense. He does not see a fishing village. He sees a wall of steel. Filling the lens is the massive slab-sided hull of the USS Canopus. It is lit by floodlights, a floating city of cranes and workshops. And moored alongside it, nestled against the tender like dark sharks, are the silhouettes of American ballistic missile submarines. He sees the distinct humps of the missile decks behind the sails, the turtlebacks that house the Polaris nuclear missiles. He swings the periscope. To his left, another submarine in a floating dry dock. To his right, the gray shapes of security launches patrolling the water. The realization hits him with the physical force of a blow to the gut. He is not in a fishing port. He is inside the Holy Loch. He is floating in the middle of the U.S. Navy's most sensitive nuclear base in Europe. And the trawler he followed? He slews the periscope back to the tender. He sees the vessel he was tracking. It is tied up alongside the Canopus. It is a submarine. It is an SSBN, a strategic missile boomer. The cognitive dissonance shatters. "It was never a fishing vessel," he whispers. The trap is revealed in all its terrifying clarity. He has been duped. He has followed an American nuclear submarine directly into its lair. He is now sitting in a dead-end inlet, surrounded by the enemy, in water so shallow he cannot dive to escape. He is the intruder in the vault. Panic is a luxury a submarine captain cannot afford, but the physiological reaction is inevitable. His heart rate spikes. The adrenaline floods his system. He understands the gravity of his mistake. This is not just a navigational error, it is a potential casus belli. If he is detected here inside the base, the Americans will not see it as an accident. They will see it as a prelude to a first strike. They will assume he is here to torpedo the Canopus and decapitate the U.S. nuclear deterrent in Europe. He snaps the handles up. "Downscope, dive, dive." The periscope hisses back into the sail. The submarine angles down, seeking the safety of the mud. But there is nowhere to go. They are already near the bottom. They settle onto the seabed, stirring up a cloud of silt. The captain orders ultra quiet. This is the highest state of stealth. All non-essential machinery is shut down. The ventilation fans are turned off. The crew is ordered to their bunks or to sit on the floor. No one speaks. No one drops a wrench. They effectively turn the submarine into a hole in the water. They are waiting. They are praying that they haven't been seen. But the Holy Loch is not just a parking lot for submarines. It is a sensor field. The bottom of the loch is laced with magnetic loops and hydrophones designed to detect exactly this kind of intrusion. On the USS Canopus and in the shore-based command center, the alarms are already beginning to register. The magnetic anomaly detector has spiked. A massive steel object has just moved into the center of the lock where no scheduled ship is supposed to be. The American watch officers are confused. The James Madison has just docked. The schedule is clear. There are no other arrivals planned. Yet the sensors are insisting that something large, metallic, and nuclear-powered is hovering just a few hundred yards from the tender. The realization on the American side is just as horrifying as it is for the Soviet captain. Intruder in the lock. The protocols for this scenario are severe. The base goes to general quarters. The security launches are scrambled. The Royal Navy frigates patrolling the Firth of Clyde are alerted. For the Soviet captain, huddled in the darkness of his control room, the waiting is agony. He knows he is trapped. To leave, he has to exit the way he came in, through the narrow throat of the lock. But that throat is now being closed. He can hear the propellers of the destroyers and frigates accelerating in the distance. He can hear the thwack, thwack, thwack of helicopter rotors beating the air above the water. The vault has been locked. This is the psychological pivot point of the story. Up until this moment, the Soviet captain believed he was the agent of his own destiny. He was the hunter, the explorer, the clever infiltrator. Now he realizes he is the rat in the maze. The arrogance of the patrol has been replaced by the terror of entrapment. He looks at his crew. They are young men, conscripts, and junior officers. They are silent, sweating in the stagnant air. They look to him for a solution. But the only solutions he has are bad ones. Option 1, stay on the bottom and wait for the air to run out. Option 2, try to run for the exit and risk being depth-charged or rammed. Option 3, surface and surrender. Surrender would mean international humiliation. It would mean the capture of a Soviet nuclear submarine intact. It would mean the end of his life as he knows it, a court-martial, a gulag, or worse. The Soviet Navy does not forgive captains who give up their ships, so he rules out surrender. He rules out waiting. He has to run. But running from the Holy Loch is not like running in the open ocean. It is an obstacle course. The channel is narrow, the water is shallow, and now the hunters are awake. In the acoustic shack, the sonar operator reports a new sound. It is not the passive thrum of a trawler. It is a high-pitched, piercing electronic chirp. Ping. It is the sound of active sonar. The Americans are no longer just listening. They are searching, they are blasting sound energy into the water, looking for the echo that will pinpoint his location. The game of hide-and-seek is over. The game of survival has begun. The Soviet submarine lifts off the mud, turning its bow toward the exit. The captain knows that the next hour will decide whether he goes home or whether he becomes the first casualty of a war that no one wants to start. The ghost in the static has been found. Now, the ghost has to find a way out of the grave he dug for himself. The sound of active sonar striking a submerged hull is not merely a noise, it is a physical assault. To the men trapped inside the steel pressure vessel of the Soviet submarine, the ping does not sound like the electronic bleep of a movie soundtrack. It sounds like a sledgehammer hitting the hull plates. It is a violent metallic crack that reverberates through the ribs of the ship, shaking dust from the overheads and causing teeth to ache. It is the sound of being seen in a place where visibility is a death sentence. In the control room, the Soviet captain grips the rail of the periscope stand. The first ping is a warning. The second is a lock. Within seconds, the rhythmic hammering becomes continuous. The acoustic environment of the Holy Loch, once a confusing hall of mirrors, has been weaponized. The sound waves are flooding the inlet, illuminating the intruder with relentless energy. On the surface, the reaction of the NATO forces is swift and terrifyingly coordinated. The initial confusion of the anomaly detection has resolved into a clear tactical picture. There is a hostile nuclear submarine inside the sanctuary. The response is not a drill. From the nearby Royal Naval Air Station at Prestwick, Westland Sea, King helicopters are scrambled. They sweep in low over the dark water of the loch, their rotors beating the heavy Scottish air. They hover over the estimated position of the contact, lowering their dipping sonars into the water on long cables. These sensors act as precise triangulation points, narrowing the search box from a general area to a specific grid coordinate. At the mouth of the loch, the gate is slamming shut. Royal Navy frigates and U.S. Navy security boats are maneuvering to block the exit channel. They are not just blocking the path, they are actively hunting. They begin to drop practice depth charges, small explosive devices that create a deafening noise but are not powerful enough to crush a hull unless they hit directly. The purpose of these charges is psychological. They are messages sent in the language of high explosives. They tell the Soviet captain, "We know you are here. We can hit you whenever we want. Surface now." Inside the Soviet boat, the situation is deteriorating rapidly. The ultra-quiet state is no longer enough. The crew can hear the explosions of the practice charges. The hull rings like a bell. The psychological pressure is immense. Every sailor on board knows that the small explosions could be replaced by full-size warheads at any second. They are sitting in a tin can at the bottom of a shooting gallery. The captain faces a trilemma, a choice between three options, all of which lead to catastrophe. His first option is to fight. He is commanding a fully armed warship. He has torpedoes in the tubes. He could fire a spread at the USS Canopus or the blocking frigates. At this range, he would not miss. He could sink the tender and likely damage several American nuclear submarines. But the captain knows the consequences of that order. If he fires a single shot inside the Holy Loch, he initiates World War III. The Americans will not view it as a tactical engagement. They will view it as a nuclear first strike on their strategic deterrent. The retaliation would be instant and total. He would be responsible for the end of civilization. This option is technically possible but morally suicidal. His second option is to surface. He can blow the ballast tanks, rise to the top, and open the hatch. He can run up the Soviet naval ensign and surrender. This would save the lives of his crew, but it would destroy everything else. Surrendering an intact Soviet nuclear submarine to NATO intelligence would be the greatest intelligence disaster in the history of the Soviet Union. The Americans would swarm the boat. They would analyze the reactor, the sonar, the codebooks, and the weapons. For the captain personally, surfacing is a fate worse than death. In the Soviet military culture of 1974, losing a ship is a crime. Surrendering one is treason. If he surfaces, he will be court-martialed. His family will be disgraced. He will likely spend the rest of his life in a labor camp if he is not executed. To surface is to admit a level of incompetence that his pride cannot tolerate. His third option is to escape. He must find a way to slip past the frigates, the helicopters, and the sensors and make it back to the open ocean. But the physics of the loch are against him. The water is shallow, barely 150 feet deep in places. The channel's narrow. To move, he has to turn on his engine. As soon as his screw turns, the cavitation will be heard by every sensor within 10 miles. He is a heavy, metallic object trying to sneak out of a lit room while wearing boots made of lead. He chooses option 3. He will not fight, and he will not surrender. He will run. But he cannot just run blindly. He needs a plan that defies the tactical logic of his pursuers. He knows that the NATO forces expect him to panic. They expect him to flush like a frightened bird, making noise and speed, which makes him an easy target. Instead, the captain decides to use the environment against them. The Holy Loch is not a swimming pool, it is a natural fjord. The bottom is rocky, uneven, and covered in silt. The water column is stratified by layers of different temperatures and salinity. Fresh water from the River Clyde mixing with the salt water of the Atlantic. These thermal layers can bend sound waves, creating acoustic blind spots. He orders the submarine to lift off the bottom. Dead slow, make turns for 2 knots. The electric creep motors engage. The propeller turns slowly, biting into the water without cavitation. The submarine inches forward, keeping its keel just feet above the mud. On the surface, the hunt intensifies. The helicopter pilots are calling out contacts. The frigates are pinging. The water is churning with the wakes of the pursuit vessels. They have him boxed in. They can see the intermittent returns on their screens. They know he is moving. The rules of engagement, ROE, for the NATO forces are complex. Technically, they are in peacetime. They cannot simply sink a Soviet submarine because it is trespassing. That would be an act of war. Their goal is to hold down the intruder, to harass him, trap him, and force him to exhaust his battery and air until he has to surface. They want to catch him, not kill him. But accidents happen. In the confusion of a close-quarters anti-submarine hunt, ships collide. Depth charges miss their marks. Nerves fray. The American and British commanders are terrified that the Soviet captain might panic and fire a torpedo in self-defense. The tension is razor thin. One twitchy finger on a trigger could turn the holy loch into a nuclear graveyard. The Soviet captain moves his ship toward the mouth of the loch. He is navigating by sonar and memory. He cannot use his periscope. The radar on the surface ships would spot the feather of the wake instantly. He is flying blind in a tunnel. The pinging is constant now. The hull vibrates with the energy of the active sonar. It is a form of psychological torture. The crew sits in the dark, sweating, listening to the enemy hammer on the door. The air in the boat is getting stale. The carbon dioxide levels are rising. The scrubbers are working, but the tension makes the men breathe faster, consuming oxygen at a higher rate. As they approach the narrow exit of the loch, the captain sees, acoustically, that the way is blocked. A Royal Navy frigate is patrolling the throat of the channel, weaving back and forth, dragging a towed array sonar. There is no way around it. To pass, the Soviet submarine must go under the frigate. But there is no depth. If he goes deep, he hits the bottom. If he goes shallow, he hits the frigate's keel or gets chopped by its propeller. The captain realizes he has to do something insane. He has to dive into a hole that shouldn't be there. He studies the charts. He knows that the seabed of the Clyde is not perfectly flat. There are trenches, depressions scoured by the currents. If he can find one of these trenches, he can drop below the thermal layer, hide in the mud, and let the frigate pass overhead. It is a maneuver that risks crushing the hull against the rocks. It risks getting stuck in the silt. But it is the only path that does not lead to a collision. He orders the dive. Flood negative tank, down angle 10. The submarine noses down. The depth gauge creeps past the safety limit for the shallow water. The keel scrapes the bottom, a horrific grinding sound that echoes through the ship like a scream. The sonar operator winces. Every ship on the surface must have heard that. But the grinding sound merges with the background noise of the shifting gravel and the coastal industry. The frigate above does not immediately react. The Soviet submarine slides into a depression in the seabed. The captain orders all stop. He settles the ship into the mud. He is playing dead. Above him, the frigate passes. The sound of its screws is a thunderous roar that drowns out everything else. The active sonar pings blast down, but the return signal is confused by the rocks and the mud. The submarine has become part of the bottom topography. For a few minutes, the contact is lost. The NATO forces are confused. The blip has vanished. Has he escaped? Has he crashed? Inside the boat, the silence returns. The crew holds their breath. They are pinned to the floor of the ocean, hiding under the keel of the enemy. The captain checks his watch. He knows this reprieve is temporary. The battery is draining. The air is fouling. He cannot stay here forever. He has bought himself a moment of invisibility, but he is still inside the bottle. To get out, he has to move again. And next time, the hunters will be angry. The hammer of the ASW forces has dropped, but it has missed by inches. The Soviet captain has survived the first round of the execution. Now he has to execute the escape. He has to take his ship from this muddy hole, thread the needle between the frigates, and reach the deep water of the Irish Sea. It is a navigational challenge that would be difficult in a simulator. Doing it for real with a nuclear reactor behind him and the Royal Navy above him is a feat of airmanship that borders on the impossible. The captain looks at the chart. He traces the line of the deep channel leading south. He knows that if he makes one mistake, if he touches the bottom too hard or cavitates the screw for 1 second, he is dead. He orders the engine ahead. Dead slow. The submarine shudders. The mud releases its grip. The ghost rises from the grave, ready to run the gauntlet. The war that never happened is entering its final, most dangerous phase. The escape from the Holy Loch is not a sprint. It is a high-wire act performed in the dark, underwater, with a gun pointed at the performer's head. The Soviet submarine, having lifted off the mud of the trench where it briefly played dead, is now creeping forward at 2 knots. The propeller is barely turning, generating just enough thrust to maintain steerage way. If the captain goes any slower, the control surfaces will lose their bite on the water and the ship will drift aimlessly into the rocks. If he goes any faster, the cavitation from the screw will scream like a siren, alerting the swarm of NATO vessels circling overhead. The geography of the escape route is a nightmare for a vessel designed to operate in the deep ocean. The submarine must navigate the narrow throat of the loch, enter the Firth of Clyde, and then thread the needle between the anti-submarine nets and the patrolling frigates to reach the North Channel, the gateway to the open Atlantic. The water here is shallow, filled with acoustic clutter and treacherous currents. For the sonar operator in the Soviet boat, the world has become a cacophony of terror. The active sonar pings from the British frigates are relentless. They strike the hull with a physical violence that makes the equipment racks rattle. Every ping is a question. Are you there? Every second of silence that follows is a temporary reprieve. The operator is trying to filter out the noise of the hunters to find the acoustic shadows, the dead zones created by the underwater topography where the submarine might hide. The captain decides on a maneuver that defies every safety regulation in the Soviet naval manual. In deep water, a submarine evades by diving deep below the thermal layer, a stratum of water where temperature changes cause sound waves to bend and bounce, creating a sonic shield. But in the shallow waters of the Clyde, the thermal layer is compressed, unstable, or non-existent. Instead of hiding under a layer of water, the captain decides to hide inside the noise of the bottom itself. He orders the submarine to hug the seabed. He is not just flying low, he is effectively driving the submarine like a tank. The keel is skimming inches above the silt. The risk of grounding is absolute. If the submarine hits a rock outcropping, the collision could rupture the pressure hull or damage the propeller. A stranded nuclear submarine in enemy waters would be the ultimate catastrophe, a geopolitical Chernobyl. The navigators bent over the charts, sweating. The bathymetric data they have is good, but it is not perfect. They are relying on soundings taken from a distance, or perhaps on the very intelligence data they gathered while shadowing the American boat in. They are navigating by blind faith and geometry. Above them, the surface is a cauldron of activity. The Royal Navy has established a cordon. Frigates are moving in a search pattern, dragging towed array sonars, long cables filled with hydrophones that listen for the slightest anomaly. Sea King helicopters are hovering, dipping their active sonar bodies into the water, creating a net of sound that covers the exit. The NATO commanders are frustrated. They had a contact. They had a magnetic anomaly. They know something is down there, but the confusing acoustics of the rocky fjord are working in the intruder's favor. The active sonar pings are bouncing off the canyon walls of the loch, creating thousands of false echoes. The Soviet captain is using this confusion as a cloak. He is moving in the clutter, timing his movements to coincide with the waves of reverberation. As the submarine approaches the sill, the underwater ridge that marks the entrance to the loch, the water gets even shallower. The clearance between the keel and the bottom, and the sail and the surface, is measured in feet. This is the choke point. A frigate is parked directly over the center of the channel, its screws churning the water. To pass, the Soviet submarine must go directly underneath the enemy ship. It is a moment of supreme audacity. The captain orders all stop. The submarine drifts on its momentum. The sound of the frigate's engines grows louder, a thundering, rhythmic beating that drowns out all other thought. The Soviet crew looks up at the overhead, as if they can see the gray steel hull of the British warship slicing through the water just 50 feet above their heads. If the frigate uses its active sonar now, looking straight down, there will be no hiding. The return signal would be instantaneous and massive. But the frigate's sonar is likely looking outward, scanning the channel ahead. The Soviet submarine slides into the baffle, the blind spot directly beneath the hull and behind the screws of the surface ship. They drift past. The thunder of the engines fades from a roar to a rumble. They are through the gate. But they are not out of the building. They are now in the Firth of Clyde, a wider body of water, but one that is heavily trafficked and patrolled. The captain knows he cannot creep at 2 knots all the way to the Atlantic. The battery will run out. The air will run out. He needs speed. He spots a thermal trough on the chart, a deeper channel used by commercial shipping and the massive ballistic missile submarines. If he can reach that channel, the water depth drops to several hundred feet. He takes a calculated risk. Make turns for 10 knots. The electric motors whine. The propeller bites. The speed increases. This is the danger zone. As the submarine accelerates, it becomes louder. Flow noise increases, the chance of cavitation, the formation of noisy bubbles on the propeller blades, skyrockets. The sonar operator watches his own noise signature. He is balancing speed against silence. He guides the captain toward the deeper water. Suddenly, a new sound cuts through the water. It is not a ping, it is a splash. A helicopter has dropped a sonobuoy directly in their path. The device hits the water, deploys its hydrophone, and begins transmitting. Active buoy! Range close! The captain reacts instantly. Hard right rudder, down angle 20. He throws the submarine into a violent, evasive turn, driving it down toward the bottom of the deep channel. He is banking on the fact that the sonobuoy has a limited range and depth setting. He is trying to get under the cone of its sensor. The submarine shudders as it turns. The deck angles steeply. Loose equipment slides. For a moment, the discipline of the crew wavers. They are tired, scared, and running a gauntlet that seems to have no end. But the captain's voice remains calm. He is narrating the escape, giving them a focal point. They pass beneath the sonobuoy. The active pinging fades behind them. They have dodged another bullet. Now, the geography begins to open up. The Firth of Clyde widens into the North Channel, the strait between Scotland and Northern Ireland. The water gets deeper. The acoustic environment shifts from the chaotic reverberation of the fjords to the cleaner, longer-range acoustics of the open sea. This transition is critical. In the open water, the Soviet submarine loses the advantage of clutter, but gains the advantage of depth. The captain can finally use the thermal layers. He orders the ship to dive to 400 feet, seeking the thermocline, the boundary between the warm surface water and the cold deep water. He finds it. The submarine slips beneath the layer. The effect is magical. The noise of the surface search, the pings, the propellers, the helicopter rotors, is suddenly muffled. The sound waves hit the density change of the thermocline and bounce off, reflecting back toward the surface. The submarine is now hiding behind a mirror of physics. The captain orders the speed increased. 15 knots. They are running now. They are sprinting for the shelf break, the point where the continental shelf drops away into the abyssal depths of the Atlantic. Once they reach the deep water, they can disappear completely, but the NATO forces are not giving up. They know the intruder has slipped the net in the lock, and they are vectoring maritime patrol aircraft, Nimrods and Orions, to patrol the exit of the North Channel. They are laying barrier lines of sonobuoys, trying to reacquire the contact. The Soviet captain plays his final card. He heads for the traffic lanes. He positions his submarine beneath a large merchant convoy leaving Liverpool. He uses the noise of the freighters and tankers to mask his sprint. He becomes a ghost once again, hiding in the acoustic shadow of commerce. Hours pass. The water deepens. 600 feet, 800 feet. The bottom drops away. They are over the shelf break. The Atlantic Ocean opens up before them, vast, deep, and dark. The sonar operator reports that the contact with the pursuit forces is fading. The pings are distant, weak, and intermittent. The helicopters have turned back. The frigates have lost the trail. In the control room, the tension breaks. There are no cheers. Soviet discipline forbids it. But there is a collective exhale. Shoulders slump. Men wipe sweat from their eyes. They have done the impossible. They have walked into the enemy's house, looked around, and walked out again without being caught. The captain orders the ship to return to patrol depth and speed. He orders the ventilation fans to full power, clearing the stale air. He goes to his cabin and sits down. His hands are shaking. He knows that what he has just done is a feat of seamanship that will be studied for decades. But he also knows that it was a mistake. He was not supposed to be there. He was tricked. And while he has escaped the physical trap of the Holy Loch, he's about to enter the political trap of the aftermath. The insane maneuver has succeeded. The submarine is safe in international waters. But the incident has generated a shockwave that is traveling faster than the submarine ever could. In Washington, London, and Moscow, the encrypted teletypes are chattering. The military phase of the crisis is over. The diplomatic phase is beginning. The Soviet submarine vanishes into the Atlantic, a steel needle disappearing into a haystack. But it has left a scar on the psyche of the Western Alliance. The sanctuary has been violated, the vulnerability has been exposed, and the question that haunts the admirals in the Pentagon is not how he got out, but how he got in. The chase is finished, the war did not start. But as the submarine sets course for the Barents Sea, the captain knows that his career is likely over. He has survived the Americans, but he has yet to survive the debriefing. As the Soviet submarine slips back into the anonymity of the deep Atlantic, the physical crisis ends, but the political crisis is just beginning. The incident at Holy Loch does not conclude with an explosion or a sinking. It concludes with a silence that is, in many ways, more terrifying than the noise of the chase. In the command bunkers of London, Washington, and Moscow, the men who control the nuclear arsenals of the world are staring at a situation that defies the standard logic of deterrence. A Soviet warship has penetrated the sanctum of the American nuclear deterrent. It has been trapped, hunted, and allowed to escape. Now, the question is not how to fight, but how to forget. In the days following the escape, a flurry of encrypted cables travels between the Pentagon, the British Ministry of Defense, and the Kremlin. The content of these messages is not a threat of war, but a negotiation of secrecy. The Cold War is often depicted as a shouting match, a collision of ideologies broadcast on the evening news. But the survival of the world often depended on the ability of superpowers to share a secret. The United States and Great Britain find themselves in a paradoxical position. They have achieved a tactical victory by flushing the intruder, but they have suffered a strategic embarrassment. To publicize the incident would be to admit that the security of Holy Loch, the base that houses the missiles aimed at Moscow, was compromised. It would force them to admit that a Soviet submarine successfully tailed an American boat through the defensive perimeter. It would reveal that the acoustic deception programs, while effective, could have unintended, catastrophic consequences. Admitting the breach would cause a political firestorm in the United Kingdom, where the presence of American nuclear weapons is already a source of intense public protest. It would undermine the credibility of NATO's underwater defenses. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, the Soviet calculation is equally grim. To protest the aggressive ASW hunt would be to admit that their submarine was inside territorial waters. It would require them to acknowledge that one of their captains was fooled by a fishing trawler and led by the nose into a trap. It would be a confession of incompetence and recklessness. So, a tacit agreement is formed. There will be no press conference. There will be no diplomatic note of protest delivered to the ambassador. There will be no démarche. The incident will be classified top secret. The logbooks of the pursuit vessels will be redacted. The sonar tapes will be locked in vaults. The sailors who dropped the depth charges and the pilots who flew the helicopters are ordered to never speak of what they saw. The Holy Loch incident is subjected to a diplomatic burial. It is erased from history before it is even written down. For the captain of the Soviet submarine, the return to base is a journey into professional oblivion. When his ship finally docks at the submarine base in Polyarny, there is no band playing on the pier. There are no medals for the daring escape. Instead, there are black sedans waiting on the quay. He is met by officers from the KGB's 3rd Directorate, the Military Counterintelligence Branch, and the Naval Prosecutor's Office. He is not arrested in handcuffs. That would be too public. He is simply invited for a debriefing that will last for weeks. The interrogation is not about treason, it is about judgment. The Soviet Admiralty is furious. They are not angry that he entered Holy Loch. They are angry that he didn't know he was doing it. They dissect his decision to follow Sierra 7. They analyze the acoustic tapes. They realize, with a mixture of horror and grudging respect, how effectively the Americans masked their signature. The captain is not executed. The Soviet Navy of the 1970s is not the Stalinist purge machine of the 1930s. Executing him would require a trial, and a trial would require evidence, and evidence would create a record. Instead, he is quietly removed from command. He is transferred to a desk job, perhaps in training or logistics. His career as a seagoing officer is over. He becomes a ghost in the system, a man who knows too much to be useful. The lessons of the incident, however, are absorbed into the bloodstream of both navies. The United States Navy realizes that their signature management technology works almost too well. The trawler disguise is effective, but using it in restricted waters creates a risk of collision or accidental engagement. Procedures are updated. The corridors for entering Holy Loch are tightened. The acoustic sensors on the seabed are upgraded to provide earlier warning of tailgaters. The Soviet Navy undergoes a profound doctrinal shift. They realize that their reliance on acoustic truth, The belief that a contact is exactly what it sounds like is a fatal weakness. New training modules are developed for sonar operators. They are taught to be suspicious of the mundane. They are taught that the Americans are masters of acoustic ventriloquism. The order goes out: never trust a fishing boat that keeps a perfect course. For 43 years, the silence holds. The Cold War freezes, thaws, and then ends. The Berlin Wall falls. The Soviet Union collapses. The American nuclear submarines leave Holy Loch in 1992, the base closing as the strategic landscape shifts. The concrete anchors are pulled up. The protesters go home. The loch returns to the sheep and the rain. But the story remains buried in the classified archives. It exists only as a rumor in the mess halls of the submarine service, a sea story told by old chiefs to young sailors. Did you hear about the Russian who followed the Madison in? It is not until 2017, through the slow grinding mechanism of declassification and the release of Freedom of Information Act requests, that the details begin to emerge. Documents from the CIA and the Ministry of Defense are released, heavily redacted, but clear enough to confirm the event. The hold down at Holy Loch becomes a matter of public record. Looking back at the incident from the safety of the present, we are forced to confront a terrifying reality. We often think of the Cold War as a clash of ideologies, a chess game played by rational actors. But the Holy Loch incident reveals that the peace of the world often hung by a much thinner thread. It hung on the decision of a single captain not to fire a torpedo when he was cornered. It hung on the discipline of a helicopter pilot not to drop a live warhead on a contact that was violating his country's sovereignty. It hung on the ability of exhausted men sitting in the dark to manage their fear. If the Soviet captain had panicked, if he had believed the practice depth charges were real attacks, he might have launched. If the American commander had believed the intrusion was a prelude to a Spetsnaz attack on the tender, he might have ordered the intruder sunk. The distance between the routine patrol and the start of World War III was measured in yards and seconds. The incident also illuminates the strange morality of the Cold War. The deception used by the USS James Madison, disguising a warship as a civilian vessel, is a ruse de guerre, a legitimate trick of war, but in peacetime it created a situation of extreme instability. It blurred the lines between the combatant and the neutral. It turned the ocean into a hall of mirrors where nothing was real. The silence that followed was a weapon in itself. By burying the truth, both sides allowed the game to continue. If the public had known how close the fleets came to shooting at each other inside a major harbor, the outcry might have forced a de-escalation, or it might have triggered a panic. The governments chose stability over transparency. They chose to let the world sleep, unaware of the nightmare that had just brushed past the window. Today, the Holy Loch is quiet. The nuclear weapons are gone. The sensors on the seabed have rotted or been removed. But the physics of the ocean have not changed. Sound still travels for miles. Thermal layers still hide secrets. And submarines still prowl the choke points of the world, listening for the enemy. The technology has evolved. The sonars are digital now. The computers are faster. But the human element remains the same. The sonar operator sitting in the dark, staring at a waterfall display, still has to make a choice. Is that a fishing boat? Is that a whale? Or is that a hunter pretending to be harmless? The story of the war that never was is a reminder of the fragility of the peace we take for granted. It is a testament to the professionalism of the men who fought a silent war, men who were trained to destroy the world but chose in the critical moment to save it instead. As we leave the gray waters of Scotland and the deep Atlantic, we are left with a final, lingering question. We know about the Holy Loch incident because the files were opened. We know about the Cuban Missile Crisis. We know about the false alarms. But the ocean is vast, and the Cold War lasted for 45 years. How many other incidents are still locked in the vaults? How many times did a captain's hand hover over a firing key? How many times did a sonar operator misclassify a sound? The silence of the sea is deep, and it keeps its secrets well. The Holy Loch incident was one moment where the veil slipped, revealing the machinery of the apocalypse grinding just beneath the surface of our daily lives. It serves as a permanent warning. The margin between a routine day and the end of history is often nothing more than a trick of the ear. The ghosts of the Cold War have faded, but the echoes of their engines still drift through the deep sound channel, reminding us that for half a century, we lived on the edge of the knife, saved not by wisdom, but by the quiet, desperate decisions of men who refused to start the fire. The Holy Loch Incident is a masterclass in the terrifying power of assumption. The Soviet captain assumed the sound was a trawler because it sounded like a trawler. The Americans assumed the Soviets would stay outside the territorial limit because that was the rule. Both sides projected their own logic onto the adversary, and both were nearly destroyed by it. It challenges our reliance on data. In the modern world, we are flooded with sensor inputs, radar, sonar, satellite imagery. We believe that if we can measure something, we understand it. But the USS James Madison proved that data can be forged. Reality can be curated. The map is not the territory. Ultimately, this story is a tribute to restraint. In a situation designed to provoke violence, a trap ship, a hunting pack, a violation of territory, no one fired. The Soviet captain accepted humiliation rather than death. The NATO commanders accepted the escape rather than the kill. They prioritized the survival of the world over the satisfaction of victory. It is a quiet, unsung heroism. There are no statues for the men who didn't push the button, but perhaps there should be. If this deep dive into the hidden history of the Cold War and the deadly games of the silent service meant something to you, we'd be honored to have you with us again. Until next time, stay curious and take good care.